everybody. Today we will be presenting prenatal counseling. I will start with a brief introduction of psychoanalytic theories about the emotional life of the fetus. This will be followed by Jonathan, who will explain prenatal genetic counseling in Europe. After that, Jean-Paul will talk about non-directive and directive types of counseling and certain factors that influence decision making. And lastly, Rita will talk to us about some case studies and an antenatal care program in Africa to compare this to the genetic prenatal counseling in Europe. So let's get started. Although prenatal counseling tends to be associated with the tracking of physical well-being of the baby, as psychologists we all know that it is important also to take into consideration the emotional well-being of the fetus and the mother. So for this we will review some of the psychoanalytic theories, or as Bion stated, imaginative conjectures of some psychoanalytic authors and philosophers. So let's start by going back around 2,450 years ago, when Plato was already discussing this dilemma between nurture versus nature. Plato believed that human beings were born with inherent ideas or preconceptions about the human experience, which in turn influenced and informs an individual's knowledge of the world. On the other hand, later in the 16th century, philosopher John Locke theorized about the human infant as a tabula rasa. That means he believed the newborn mind is a blank slate that requires sensory data to gain experience and knowledge about the world. Even though John Locke's tabula rasa theory influenced our perspective about the prenatal experience, contemporary psychoanalysts have been attempting to group all the data from empirical research and medical studies in order to figure out this correlation between prenatal and perinatal life. That suggests that infants not only have the ability to communicate with their primary caregiver since birth, but that many of the fetus sensory systems, like auditory, visual, and tactile, are already online and fully functioning. So even biologically speaking, it makes sense that all the data that the fetus is receiving will be stored somehow, and it is most likely to be forming unconscious preconceptions in the fetus. Yet also we have inherent instincts that help us attach to our primary caregiver. And our inborn abilities, according to psychoanalysis, is that babies or infants can imitate, they can identify intentionality, they also collaborate, and that they have this innate ability to seduce the caregiver. Of course, not in like a sexual adult kind of way, but in an engaging kind of way. In the interpretation of dreams, Freud discusses a lot about birth dreams. A large number of dreams, often accompanied by anxiety and having as their content such subjects as passing through narrow spaces or being in water, are based upon fantasies of intrauterine life, of existence in the womb, and of act of birth. Freud also noted a symbolic correlation between sleeping and that of an unconscious return to the security of the mother. Somatically, sleep is a reactivation of intrauterine existence, fulfilling as it does the conditions of repose, warmth, and exclusion of stimulus. Indeed, in sleep, many people resume to feel posture. The physical state of a sleeping person is characterized by an almost complete withdrawal from the surrounding world and a cessation of all interest in it. Later in time, and with more technological tools, Mancia developed the hypothesis of the proto-mental nucleus in fetal life. He argued that through active sleep, or REM sleep cycle in adults, fetal dreaming aids the prenatal processing and integration of inborn biological sensory stimuli and psychological stimuli that's passed down from mother through multiple channels of transmission. Macia suggested that the integration of these stimuli leads to the formation of proto-representations or proto-conceptions of the external world. He also suggested that this process is a precursor for the postnatal container/contained relationship. Moreover, and quite fascinating, empirical research also confirms Freud's most famous and influential insight to the continuity from the prenatal to the perinatal experience. There is much more continuity between intrauterine life and earliest infancy than the impressive causura of the act of birth would have us believe. In her book, From Fetus to Child, Dr. Alessandra Pionelli talks about her longitudinal study with 11 fetuses, 3 singles and 2 sets of twins. The use of ultrasonic scans in pregnancy made it possible for her to observe the fetus undisturbed in the womb. She observed their developmental at home from birth up to 4 years. And in her book, she includes a description of the psychoanalytic psychotherapy of one of the research children and the psychoanalysis of 5 other very young children whose behavior in analysis suggested that they were deeply preoccupied with their experience in the womb. And I quote, "I do not want to assert, however, that nature is more important than nurture. What I think my findings do suggest is that interplay between nature and nurture begins much earlier than is usually thought, and that certain prenatal experiences may have a profound emotional effect on the child, especially if these prenatal events are reinforced by postnatal experiences." And of course, we also have the contribution from Ferenczi, who, after Freud, stated that each individual is occupied from the moment of birth onward by a continuous regressive trend towards re-establishment of the intrauterine situation. He also discussed the origins of omnipotence. He noted, "If, therefore, the human possesses a mental life when in the womb, although only an unconscious one, and it would be foolish to believe that the mind begins to function at the moment of birth, he must get from his existence the impression that he is in fact omnipotent. For what is omnipotence? The feeling that one has all that one wants, and that one has nothing left to wish for. The fetus, however, could maintain this of itself, for it always has what it is necessary for the satisfaction of its instincts, and so has nothing to wish for. It is without wants." In that same line, Bion also developed some concepts that are very important to understand the prenatal experience. His concept of parasitical forms of transference was a precursor to his ideas regarding the origins of aggressivity occurring in fetal life. So a parasitical transference is when the patient fantasizes themselves as living inside the analyst's body, and in response to any link that could lead to growth, there is a violent move to destroy it. Bion also intuited a fetal clock that would be triggered by fetal movements and the experience of the maternal physiological rhythms. He also theorized that hallucinations and delusions are the residue of memories of intrauterine experience. And this made important contributions to Freud's theory that there is some connection between postnatal thought and emotional life in prenatal life. To exaggerate the question for the sake of simplicity, are we to consider that the fetus thinks, fears, or sees, or hears? If so, how primitive can these thoughts or feelings or ideas be? And I took this information from a very impressive systematic review from John H. Turner. So if you're interested in reading more about that, you can find the references in the presentation. So this is all from my end, and now Jonathan will talk to us about a genetic prenatal council in Europe.